I should have trusted my first instinct about her. It was the kind of feeling that arrives without fanfare, a small, hard pebble in your shoe that you keep adjusting around because you hope it will pass. I didn't listen. I told myself I was being dramatic, that family was complicated, that mothers-in-law loved to meddle, and that was as far as it went. That choice to quiet the pebble became a pattern of mistakes I would measure in late nights, in printed screenshots, in an evidence folder I would come to carry like a talisman. The first image that pushed me over the line wasn't violent or cinematic. It was ordinary, and therefore worse. The cold blue rectangle of my living room TV turned into a live feed of my front hall. I walked in after an errand, keys in hand, and saw my own doorway on my own screen. The white paint, the scuffed shoe shelf, the cheap brass hook with the dent where a toddler had practiced hammering one afternoon. The TV's glow didn't feel like light. It felt like an accusation. I remember the small things, as if keeping them in a grid helps hold the memory steady. The key ring hung heavy, jangling against my palm. The radiator in the hall clicked once, then settled into its usual ticking rhythm. Lemon-scented cleaner was still drying on the floorboards. The pattern left by the mop looked like faint fingerprints. I had the kind of home you collect from thrift stores and hand-me-downs, soft edges and slightly frayed cushions, and that ordinariness made the invasion almost unbearable. The ordinary is our most private thing. When it is violated, you can no longer trust the friction of your rug or the distance of your own sofa. At first, I convinced myself it was a malfunction, a glitch in the streaming app, an accidental preview of a door camera feature. I clicked the remote, cursed at the tiny font of a settings menu, toggled, unplugged the HDMI pipe like a surgeon snipping at a loose thread. The screen went dark, then came back to the same live angle. The frame was exactly my hallway, the camera aimed at my door. The timestamp read it was live. I called my husband, who was at work, and listened to the small, practical voice I knew convert into a quiet fret. He walked me through the basics. Did you change the password? Did you reboot the router? While I paced, the TV's cold light washing over the couch. There are seconds in which time thins so much you can hear the hiss of the kettle in the kitchen even when it isn't on. My husband promised to call our cable provider. He said he would get home as soon as he could. He said the right things in the way people do when their hands are tied by distance and their mouths are trying to be useful. By the time an officer arrived, Officer Rodriguez, a compact man with steel-rimmed glasses and a soft, plain voice, I had already printed a screenshot. Printing is my first instinct for sanity now. Print it, he told me later, like you're creating a breadcrumb trail. I had learned to treat digital things like ghosts. They can be gone in a blink. I hit Command-P and watched the slow, methodical breath of the printer. The paper that came out smelled faintly of toner and the small human panic that sits under any mechanical sigh. Officer Rodriguez was patient, in the only way people who have seen small domestic emergencies can be. He wrote notes in block letters, asked questions with the rhythm of a professional who knows where to hold back sympathy and where to offer it. He didn't promise miracles. He did tell me what to do next. Preserve the device, do not reset it. Take photos of any unusual packaging or receipts. He suggested we list any recent visitors or unusual gifts. He asked if anyone in the family had access to spare devices. When I said casually, "My mother-in-law brought over a little smart hub last month, said she found it at a sale and thought it would make our life easier," there was a pause at the other end of the table where we sat with mugs gone cold. I watched Rodriguez's pen stop. He didn't look at me as though he believed that was proof of anything. He looked instead like someone who had heard enough small coincidences to know they sometimes coagulate into pattern. That should have been the moment the pebble in my shoe became something I could no longer ignore. The comment about the sale and the hub should have lit up in neon in my head. Instead, I made a small joke to diffuse it. Well, at least she shops affordably, and felt the familiar family reflex to smile and move on. My instinct had the shape of a narrowed eye. I ignored it, because denying suspicion felt like an offering of peace. I didn't realize I was handing over the keys in the process, metaphorically first, and in the end, almost literally. The detective who came next was younger, which made his experience of the world feel, perversely, more solid. He introduced himself as Detective Lawson, not in a dramatic way, just in the way a person gives his name as a fact, like he was identifying a tool rather than a character. He asked me to make a list of every device in the house that could stream or listen. He suggested making copies of any correspondence. He explained subpoenas in a patient tone. They're requests to platforms or service providers to produce records that show where a device connected from, the accounts associated with it. He used the word IP address, but explained it in plain language, as a kind of digital return address. He told me not to tinker with anything else, not to ask for technical details online in forums where people might suggest ways to test credentials, because that can erase traces the police need. I began to collect things like evidence without realizing how much of myself I was handing over to that folder. I printed emails. I boxed the hub in a cardboard shoebox, then wrapped it again, labeling it Exhibit A, Smart Hub, in a hand that trembled and then steadied. I took photographs of the serial number. I made a copy of the receipt my mother-in-law had given. She had left it casually folded on our kitchen table the day she dropped the hub off, a flimsy white slip with a smudged store logo and a tot of numbers. The receipt sat in the folder now, a bland piece of paper that looked nothing like the way my life felt inside it. In the tea-stained space between initial shock and the slow machinery of investigation, there was an odd, exhausting freedom and a new kind of work. The work is ritualistic. It keeps you from dissolving into panic. You write dates on everything. You document phone calls. You print headers of email messages. You note when Detective Lawson texts that he's put in a request to the provider, and when Officer Rodriguez promises to check patrol logs for that night. Rituals make the world legible again. They are small acts of control when your home has become a place where borders have been blurred. My mother-in-law, Ruth, is a woman who arrives in the world with embroidered dish towels and a readiness to fix misaligned picture frames. She is not a cartoon villain. She is given to small performances of care, bundling lasagna and foil, bringing over jars of pickles, saying things about family that are folded in obligations. Her meddling is the kind that gets explained away at dinners. I was only trying to help. That is why the pebble in my shoe takes so long to become unbearable. You can always call your doubt ungrateful. There were other little things. She had shown up unannounced once on a chilly Saturday, just to drop off a cake, and then lingered to rearrange our spice rack. She had a habit of learning the routines of people she loved, and then using that knowledge like a map, as if knowing when someone liked their tea weak was a way to navigate them emotionally. She had said, half joking, within earshot of Leigh husband, "You know, in our day, you didn't need to worry about everything being connected. You'd be amazed how clean a house feels when it's not broadcasting to the world." She said it with the kind of nostalgia that made it sound wistful rather than threatening. It made me smile and then frown, because nostalgia is an excellent accomplice to complacency. Detective Lawson told me we should look for patterns. That phrase, look for patterns, became both a comfort and a sharpened edge. Patterns make scatterings legible. They take weird, isolated events and let you see the thread that ties them together. My pattern began with the TV. That night, I sat on the couch and rewatched the footage I'd managed to capture before turning off the device. The hallway had been empty for hours, but the timestamp showed intermittent shadows. People passing by in nighttime clothes, a shape that seemed to pause at the door, the faint impression of a hand on the knob. We had no audio with that footage, only the visual feed, but even the play of someone's shadow is intimate in a way nothing else is. After the TV incident, we slept badly. Sleeping became a strategic activity. The doors locked twice, the windows latched, the light left on in the kitchen because darkness seemed to conspire with memory. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table and made a list. Who had been in the house in the last month? Who had given us devices? Any unusual packages? The list looked ridiculous and profound at the same time, a way of cataloging normal life into suspect territory. My hand shook a little as I dated the papers. The early CTA came almost as a reflex, because in those weeks I kept feeling like the only thing that could keep me steady was the knowledge that I wasn't alone. If this resonates, share one small safety tip in the comments, I found myself thinking, imagining a distant viewer clicking a keyboard and offering a simple sentence: change your passwords, unplug devices you don't trust, and call someone. It felt small and efficient, like passing along a handhold. It turned out that passing along handholds was exactly what would begin to matter. A friend, my sister, who lived a few towns over, offered to sleep over the first week after the TV feed. She arrived with a duffel bag and a calm that was almost medical in its focus. She brought over an electric kettle, a box of herbal tea, and a stare that made me feel seen. We brewed tea, we sat. She held the evidence folder as if it were a fragile animal that might startle and run. That week, some of my shame dissolved into practical planning. Shame, I discovered, likes darkness more than daylight. When you put your problem on a table and hand it to someone else, the edges become softer. It was a late Thursday afternoon when the second incident happened, the one that made the pattern stop being just data and start being a violation that felt like a breach of voice. I had recently accepted a used baby monitor from a neighbor as a stopgap. We weren't expecting a baby anymore, but friends had offered it as a gift for my niece when she came to visit. It's the kind of small, earnest economy parents and neighbors maintain. It was a compact device with a dome camera and a small microphone. It sat in its box on our kitchen counter for a week before we even opened it, a neat plastic spheroid that looked like a child's toy. I am careful with gifts now, more than I was 2 months earlier, but back then I was still giving people the benefit of the doubt. The monitor arrived in an unremarkable package with a sticky note. From Claire, works fine. We plugged it into the outlet above the high shelf so we could check the angle later, a lazy domestic chore that seemed as harmless as folding laundry. The monitor's camera faced the play area where my niece would sit. No one thought much of it.
The microphone, however, was active in ways that were not meant for casual listening. I had assumed it would be an isolated, room-based device, the sort of gadget that politely waits for a child to make noise and then signals a parent. What I didn't expect was the way it would turn my house into a room that could be overheard. I didn't realize the microphone was broadcasting to a cloud account I didn't own. I didn't realize it could be pinged by someone else's app. I didn't know how to check these things, and that ignorance is an inconvenient kind of privilege until it isn't. I was sitting at the table, the evidence folder open beside me, when my phone buzzed with a notification from an app I hadn't used in weeks. It was a push alert showing a short snippet of sound captured by a device linked to our household, an audio clip capped with a timestamp and the label, "Motion Detected." The clip itself was only a few seconds long. When I hit play, I heard a voice say a nickname I had been called only in the most intimate of moments. It was a word my grandmother used, a private, ridiculous name that had never existed outside family bedrooms and kitchen counters where someone would tease me awake in the mornings. To hear it spoken through the monitor's recording, through a device I had allowed into my home, felt like someone had reached across years and plucked the inside of me and laid it on the counter. The voice on the clip was not my husband's. It wasn't a neighbor. It carried the cadence of someone who knew how to use that nickname in a way that suggested they had used it before. My first instinct was to think that every woman in the family. The nickname had been shared in Sunday rooms and at Thanksgiving. It was the sort of word that slipped into the chorus of a family and became almost a private brand between certain people. For a susurration of breath, I thought, irrationally, immediately, of Ruth. Then I hated myself for thinking it. You do not want to suspect your family. You do not want to be the person who reads malicious intent into bedtime words. And yet the pebble in my shoe had sharpened into glass. I played the clip again and again. The edges of the sound changed in my memory each time I listened. There were tiny inflections, a certain brevity that made the clip sound like a greeting rather than a description. I clicked on the metadata and saw the timestamp, the file origin. Detective Lawson told me later that metadata is a fragile thing. It can prove more than memory, but it can also be missing or manipulated. At the time, all I could do was hold the phone like a bleeding thing and hand it to my sister, who was still in the living room actually folding a sweater. Her face went blank for a beat. She didn't say Ruth's name. She didn't have to. She only said, "We need to get this to Detective Lawson." You think in the moments of discovery that someone else will be able to put together the phrase into a proper sentence for you. You hope someone with the solidity of a detective will make sense of your shaking breadcrumbs, but the detective's role is slow, methodical, and bound by evidence. He asked for the original file, the app screenshots, the device. He told us he would log the clip and try to trace the account it came from. He spoke phrases like cloud account and device pairing and authorized users, but in the patient way of someone who knows those words need context, lest they kindle panic rather than clarity. I called my mother-in-law that night because her number was small fact in my address book that used to feel like a safe thing. I felt ridiculous as I dialed. I rehearsed, felt my jaw tighten, then dropped into a voice that sounded conventional. I asked about the gift. She paused with that small throat-clearing habit she has when she is about to choose between a confession and a bolstering phrase. "Oh, that old thing? I told Claire she could have it. I didn't realize it would still be linked to an account. You know how these things are. People pass them on. I just wanted to help." I listened to the explanation like water streaming over stones. No one had said the words "I did it." No one had even said I might have done it. But her casualness vibrated in me like the low hum of a refrigerator. It filled the joints of my fear with a cold steadying. I didn't want to make her into a villain because she loved her son and he loved her. I didn't want to break families the way some things, once broken, cannot be repaired. So I asked for the receipt again, more gently than I felt. She said she'd look for it. That night, I dreamed of the hallway camera as if it had become a mouth. Footsteps I didn't recognize echoed in my house. I woke to the radiator's habitual clank, and for a moment I couldn't tell the difference between sleep and a recording. Hypervigilance is not dramatic. It's an accumulation of small refusals: to answer the door without checking the peephole, to leave an appliance plugged in at night, to sit in the glow of a screen that might be feeding someone else a view of your life. I started to write timestamps on a pad of paper stuck to the refrigerator. 8:02 p.m., TV shows hallway. 3:14 a.m., motion detected on monitor, short audio clip. 10:20 a.m., email with photo arrives. The pad became a map of suspicion rather than a grocery list. The act of writing made the events less ephemeral. It gave them weight. There is a peculiar loneliness in cataloging violation. It is the sort of loneliness that is both private and strangely social. You feel alone because no one in your immediate household can unmake what is done. You are social because the next step always requires reaching beyond yourself for help. Each step forward involves naming the experience aloud and handing over a piece of your life to someone else. Officer Rodriguez, Detective Lawson, my sister, my therapist. These were the names forming like buoys in a rough sea.
I began to sleep with the lights at half-mast and the evidence folder under my arm like a flimsy armor. The rituals multiplied. I would print new screenshots as they appeared, date them, and slip them into clear plastic sleeves. I scanned receipts and uploaded them to a cloud folder I used only for this purpose, with a password I changed weekly. I made a note of every time my husband was away and what the house looked like when he was out. The rituals did not cure me. They simply kept the panic from becoming untethered. They gave Detective Lawson something to work with. As the days wore on, I found myself reconstructing every small exchange with Ruth as if I were rereading a book where I had missed a line. When she handed me the smart hub, did she hesitate? When she laughed about our connected age, was there a glint that meant more than nostalgia? Memory is treacherous when you're trying to hold it accountable to truth. It reshapes itself to fit the shape of your fear. And yet, though suspicion grew like a stain, everything that could prove anything legally was still slippery. There was a difference between an odd receipt and a signed confession. There was a chasm between an audio clip that used a nickname and proof someone had intentionally listened. Detective Lawson explained this without cruelty. He said we could request records, ask platforms for logs, see whether the hub had been factory reset and re-registered, whether the monitor's cloud account had new authorized users. He said it would take time and patience. Time felt like a double-edged thing. It was mercy for someone who needed to gather facts. It was a weapon for guilt and doubt. Because in time, people's memories can soften, and the sharp edges of your fear can dull into stories that feel unspeakably petty when told in a broader context. I saw that potential erasure in the way my husband sometimes folded his arms and suggested we give Ruth the benefit of the doubt. He was trying to hold the family together in the way people do when loyalty comes into conflict with evidence. I was trying not to be erased. One evening, 3 days after the monitor clip, an email arrived. It was from an anonymous address, a subject line that read, "Kitchen." The body contained a single attachment, a photo. I remember the way my mouth went dry and the way my fingers hovered over the mouse like someone trying to stop a moving train. The thumbnail preview showed what looked at first like sunlight on a counter. Then I opened it. The photograph was of our kitchen. It wasn't a candid shot snapped from the street. It was taken from a vantage point that suggested someone had been standing at the high shelf where we'd placed the unused monitor. The angle was intimate. The pattern of flour on the countertop where my sister had tried to make pancakes that weekend, the chipped mug with the scar on the rim that my husband always used, the cartoon magnet on the fridge door with our niece's drawing.
In the center of the frame lay our cutting board, and on it the knife we use for onions. There was a small sticky note beside the board, with my name on it and handwriting I didn't immediately recognize. I stared at the picture until it turned into a collection of predatory details. There was a shadowed arc on the right side that suggested a body had been nearby. The metadata on the email header told Detective Lawson something he could use. I didn't fully understand it in the moment, only that the photograph had been sent in a way that made the sender unclothed by anonymity. He told me later it suggested the message had been routed through an account linked to an unfamiliar IP range, and that he had already requested a subpoena to ask the platform for logs. He said the word subpoena with professional care. It sounded like a gentle injunction that required patience and legal form. I called Ruth that night and asked, carefully, without accusation,
whether she had seen or sent anything. She said no, of course she hadn't. She sounded incredulous in the way people do when asked something that would break a relationship if true. I listened to that tone, the one that says, I would never do that, and wondered whether its motor oil was sincerity or performance. I didn't know the answer. No one ever told me they were a perfect liar in advance. The photograph in my inbox was a time when the scales between instinct and proof trembled. I felt both vindicated and embarrassed. I had wanted to be wrong for the preservation of familial peace. But when the photograph sat in my email client like a small, undeniable thing, my rationalizations collapsed into a room of quiet evidence. I began to understand that my first instinct about her, the pebble in my shoe that I thought I could walk around, had been right to exist. Whether it would be validated in a court or by a confession was a separate matter. For now, it was only a moral truth. I had felt a shape of something wrong, and that feeling was no longer an anomaly. I have replayed the beginning so many times in my mind that the memory has started to feel rehearsed, as if I'm watching a recording of myself instead of remembering something real. People say dread arrives all at once, like a shadow passing over the sun, but that wasn't how it happened for me. My dread arrived quietly, disguised as courtesy, wrapped in warm smiles and casserole dishes, polite questions that lingered too long, and a pair of watchful eyes that learned the rhythm of my house better than I ever meant for them to. I didn't realize a boundary was being crossed until the boundary was already behind her, and I was the one standing outside, wondering how I let it happen in the first place. It began in the late weeks of spring, when the air had that sticky softness that makes everything feel closer than it should. My mother-in-law, Ruth, had always been involved, but this was different.
She started showing up on weekday mornings, tapping lightly on the glass pane of the back door, holding a container of soup or a bag of groceries she insisted we must be out of. She never called ahead, she never texted, she simply appeared, always at a time when my husband was at work and I was alone, sometimes still in pajamas, sometimes with my hair tied into a rushed knot, the house half cleaned, the kitchen counter cluttered. Vulnerable moments, she had a talent for finding them. Her reason was always the same. I was just thinking of you. She said it with a softness that left no room for refusal, as if denying her kindness would make me ungrateful by default. The first time she came unannounced, I didn't think much of it. The second time, I grew uneasy. By the fifth time, I began to dread the possibility that she knew my routine better than I did. She never asked if it was a good moment. She simply stepped inside, setting bags on the counter, inhaling the air as if she were checking whether the house smelled the way she believed it should. And she always commented. On something. On everything. You rearranged the living room again? You like this detergent now? Interesting choice. Did you mean to leave the bedroom window open? It's not very safe. You've been up late again. I can see it on your face. Each remark small enough to sound innocent, but heavy enough to feel like assessment. My husband, Daniel, dismissed my discomfort with the easy confidence of someone who had never been undermined by a smile. She just cares, he said. She's trying to help. But the pattern wasn't helpful. It was invasive. Objects in the house began to shift when I wasn't looking. Towels folded differently, clothes reorganized, a spice rack that had been alphabetized by someone who wasn't me. She always denied touching anything, even when the change was unmistakable, even when the drawer arrangement mirrored exactly how she organized things in her own kitchen. It must have been you, she said once, voice airy, eyes steady. Sometimes we forget the little things. Sometimes we forget the little things. Except I didn't forget. I remembered precisely. That phrase began looping in my mind like a warning disguised as advice. And the strange thing was, I started questioning myself. Was I exhausted? Was I misremembering? Was I imagining tension that wasn't there? That's the trick with subtle manipulation. It doesn't confront you, it erodes you. One afternoon, she arrived with a small basket of folded laundry. My laundry, underwear included, clothes I had left in the hamper in the bedroom, a room she had no reason to enter, no permission to access. She smiled as if she had done something profoundly thoughtful. I noticed the hamper was full, she said. You have enough on your plate. I opened my mouth to protest, but she gently placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just enough to silence me. It's okay, she murmured.
You don't have to say thank you. Just accept it. But I didn't feel helped. I felt trespassed. After she left, I locked the bedroom door. It was a foolish gesture. She had already proven she didn't need permission to walk through spaces that didn't belong to her. I told Daniel again, but he only sighed, rubbing at his temple like I was giving him a headache. I'll talk to her, he promised, though the promise was tired, the kind you say just to stop an argument from growing heavier. Nothing changed. Then came the comments about my health, my sleep, my habits, my stress. "You're losing weight again," she said one morning, eyes scanning me from head to toe. "You look pale. Are you eating? Are you sleeping? I worry." I didn't answer. If I did, she would collect the words like ammunition to use later. She studied me silently for a moment, then added, "I know things about Daniel that you don't. He tries to act strong, but he needs someone stable around him, someone calm, someone who doesn't fall apart at the smallest thing." The implication was clear. I was unstable. I was failing. I was disappointing her son. I said nothing, but the comment lodged itself inside my chest like a stone. Over time, she began to speak for me in conversations. At dinners, she would answer Daniel's questions before I could open my mouth. "She's been tired lately. She gets overwhelmed with decisions. She's very sensitive." Each remark delivered sweetly, with a smile, in front of others, a performance of concern that left me sounding fragile, unreliable, delicate as paper. Daniel never corrected her. He just let the narrative accumulate. There is a moment, an invisible threshold, when discomfort shifts into fear. Mine happened on a Tuesday afternoon when I came home early from the market. The house was quiet, the air still. I walked into the living room and saw something that made all the small, quiet warnings inside me align into a single chilling line. Ruth's shoes by the door. She was in my house again. Uninvited. I heard movement upstairs and froze. A soft thump, a murmured hum, as if she were talking to herself or to someone who wasn't there. My skin prickled. I stood at the bottom of the staircase, waiting to hear what door she would exit from. She stepped out of the bedroom. My bedroom, holding a stack of my folded sweaters like she had every right to be there. "Oh," she exclaimed with theatrical surprise, "you're home early." I didn't ask why she was upstairs. I didn't ask why she had entered a locked room. I could see the small metal shim in her hand, barely hidden by her sweater sleeve. My voice came out thin, too calm. "What were you doing in my room?" Her expression didn't flicker. "Just tidying." "You don't live here," I said. "No," she replied, with a sweetness that felt like poison. "But I take care of people I love. Sometimes you don't see what needs to be done, but I do. It's a gift, you know, being able to see what others can't." Then she gently placed the sweaters on the bed and brushed past me. No shame, no apology, just quiet authority. As she reached the door, she added without looking back, "You'd be lost without me." That sentence echoed for hours after she left. I tried to tell Daniel again, really tell him, but he shut down, defensive and tired. "You're reading too much into everything," he said. "She's trying. She's always tried. You're the one acting distant." I felt the ground shift beneath the relationship then, subtle but irreversible. Something in him believed her more than me. Something in her wanted that. The psychological pressure escalated the following weeks. I would find drawers rearranged, notes left on the fridge with reminders I didn't write, pill bottles moved to the front of the cabinet as if she were suggesting I needed them. My favorite mug vanished for a week, then reappeared on the top shelf where I couldn't reach it without a stool. My calendar entries mysteriously shifted. Appointments moved, tasks rearranged, plans altered in ways that made me doubt whether I had written them correctly in the first place. And the more she interfered, the more Daniel questioned my reactions. "You're being dramatic. She's trying to help. You always think the worst." He didn't understand that Ruth wasn't helping. She was curating me, curating the version of me she wanted him to see. One afternoon, I found a small notebook tucked behind a jar of sugar in the pantry. It was mine, my journal, but not where I'd left it. Several pages had been dog-eared, not ripped, not defaced, just marked. Marked for what? For reference? For leverage? The violation was intimate and bone-deep. I began to feel like a guest in my own house, like I was being subtly moved, rearranged, shaped into something else. Something smaller. And through all of it, Ruth kept wearing that same soft smile, like everything she did was an act of love, like I should be grateful. But dread is patient. It grows quietly. And mine was learning to speak. I wish I could tell you that the night after the dinner was normal, that I slept, that the world reset, that whatever had crawled under my skin slipped out quietly in the dark. But that would be a lie. The truth is this. The house did not feel like my house anymore. Every creak in the floorboards felt deliberate. Every shadow felt placed. And every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing Eleanor's expression watching me from across the table. The look of a woman cataloging me like a piece of property she expected to inherit. Or dismantle. It started small. A sound. A shift. A whisper of movement where there should have been none. At 2:11 a.m., I woke up to the faint click of our bedroom door. Not a slam, not a knock. A click. Gentle. Controlled. The kind a person makes when trying not to be heard. My husband, Mark, was asleep beside me, his breathing deep, his body turned away. For a full minute, I stared at the ceiling, waiting for my heartbeat to slow, waiting for logic to tell me it was nothing but settling wood. But logic didn't come, and the air in the room changed, like someone had stepped inside and brought the cold with them. I sat up slowly, careful not to wake Mark. The hallway beyond the door was dark, but there was a faint, unnatural glow on the floorboards. Like moonlight, but wrong. Too sharp, too white. I swung my legs out of bed, skin prickling, and stepped toward the door. The glow brightened with each step, as if sensing me. When I finally pulled the door open, I froze. At the end of the hallway, Eleanor was standing completely still. Her silhouette was unmistakable. Small frame, rigid shoulders, hair pinned in that outdated bun she insisted made her look presentable. She wasn't moving. She wasn't breathing. She was just there, watching, except she wasn't supposed to be in our house at all. She lived 30 minutes away, and the front door was locked. My voice barely came out. "Eleanor?" She didn't answer, and for a moment I genuinely wondered if I was still asleep, caught somewhere between nightmare and waking. Because the way she stood there, it wasn't human. No shift of weight, no rise of the chest, no blink. She looked like a figure cut out of the dark itself. And then, the light. A sudden flick, like a camera flash without sound. The glow vanished, taking her silhouette with it. The hallway was empty. My breath trembled out of me in one sharp exhale, and I grabbed the wall for support. I stood there until the numbness in my fingers returned, until I convinced myself I must have imagined the whole thing. Stress, lack of sleep, that dinner getting under my skin more than I'd wanted to admit. That had to be it. Except, the smell gave it away. A faint trace of her perfume, an old-fashioned, overly sweet scent she wore in heavy layers. It hung in the hallway even after she disappeared. She had been there. Or something that looked like her. The next morning, I told Mark what happened. I expected shock, concern, maybe even a joke to break the tension. Instead, he frowned like I told him the coffee was a little burnt. "You had a nightmare," he said. "You've been stressed. My mom is not coming into our house at 2 a.m. I waited for him to say more, to defend me, to take it seriously, to show even a flicker of worry. But he didn't. He brushed past me, grabbed his keys, and left for work early. That was the first moment I realized something was forming between us. Not distance, something thicker, like fog, like interference, like someone or something was wedging itself into the spaces where he and I used to fit. That someone felt suspiciously like his mother. The next incident happened later that week. I came home from the grocery store and found the front door unlocked. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I'd been distracted. Maybe I'd rushed out.
But that excuse dissolved when I walked inside. Every cabinet in the kitchen was open. Not swung wide or carelessly pulled, but open at the same exact angle, perfectly aligned, like a display. The type of eerie precision that makes your brain immediately reject the idea of an accident. As if the room had been inspected or prepared. I closed everything, trying to ignore the tremor in my hands, and went upstairs to put away laundry. When I opened my dresser, I found something resting neatly on top of my folded shirts. A single hairpin. Silver, old-fashioned, identical to the ones Eleanor wears. My throat closed. The air seemed to thin around me, pressing against my skin like invisible hands. I dropped the hairpin as if it were hot metal, and it clattered on the hardwood floor with a sound that seemed far too loud for its size. Someone was in the house. Someone who wanted me to know. I called Mark immediately. He picked up on the third ring, irritation already in his voice before I even spoke. "Another nightmare?" he said flatly. "She was here," I whispered. "Mark, she was inside the house. I found." "No," he cut me off. "My mother does not break into houses. She doesn't sneak around. You're reading into things because you don't like her. And honestly, it's getting exhausting." There it was. Sharp. Defensive. Not him. Not the man I married. I wanted to scream that it wasn't about dislike, that something was genuinely wrong, that something in this house was shifting in ways I couldn't explain, but every time I tried to speak, the words tangled in my throat. He wasn't listening. Or something didn't want him to. When he hung up, I sank onto the edge of the bed and tried to breathe. But the room felt smaller, the air heavier, and I kept looking at the dresser, at the place where the hairpin had sat, as if it might reappear on its own. That's when I noticed the indentation, a small, unmistakable imprint on the surface of the shirts. A finger, long, thin, pressing down, as if someone had stood then for a long, long time, watching me sleep. The next day, Eleanor invited us to dinner. Mark accepted before I could answer. Her house felt wrong the moment we walked in. Too quiet, too cold. The lights dimmed just a little too low, making every corner seem deeper. I noticed that none of the windows were open, not a single crack. She was always particular about drafts, but this felt extreme. Sealed. Contained. She cooked pot roast, but the smell made my stomach twist. Something metallic. Something faintly sour. She smiled when I barely touched my plate. "Not hungry?" she asked, voice dripping with false warmth. "I'm fine," I said quietly. Her eyes lingered on me, longer than polite, longer than necessary. Studying me. Assessing me. Like she was waiting for something to show on her skin or change in her expression. Mark didn't notice, or pretended not to. At one point, while he stepped outside to take a call, she leaned forward across the table. Her voice dropped to a whisper, too soft, too controlled. "You're not meant for him." I froze. Her smile widened, slowly, unnaturally. "He needs someone who won't interfere." "Interfere with what?" I whispered. "You'll understand soon." The way she said it, it wasn't a threat. It was a promise. A cold shiver crawled up my spine and settled at the base of my neck. I pushed back from the table, needing air, wanting to escape the suffocating atmosphere pressing in on me. I went to the bathroom, locked the door, and splashed cold water on my face. The mirror was slightly fogged, even though the room was cool. When I wiped the surface clean,
my breath caught in my throat. On the glass, just above my reflection, were 3 faint words, written in something so pale I almost missed them. Stay, quiet, obedient. My stomach dropped and I stumbled backward, shaking. I rubbed my hand across the glass, desperate to erase the message, but the words didn't smudge, didn't fade. They stayed on the mirror like they had been etched into the silver backing behind the glass. Permanent, deliberate, made for me. I fumbled for the doorknob, ready to run out of the house, but before I could unlock it, a soft tap hit the other side of the door. Not a knock, a tap. Slow, measured. The same deliberate rhythm as the cabinets. The same controlled sound I heard the night she appeared in the hallway. Tap, tap, tap. I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. Then I heard her voice, just inches from the door. Calm, gentle. Are you almost done, dear? Fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a single sentence spoken through a closed door, dripping with meaning you can't fully understand. When I finally opened it, she was gone. The hallway was empty, but the cold lingered where she had stood. On the drive home, Mark didn't ask why I was shaking. He didn't ask why I insisted we leave early. He didn't ask why I kept glancing at the back seat like something might be hiding there. He just drove. Silent. Expression unreadable. And then, under his breath, so faint I almost missed it, he whispered something. 4 words. 4 words that didn't sound like him at all. She's right about you. I turned to him slowly, my throat tightening. What did you say? He blinked, confused, almost dazed. What? I didn't say anything. But I know what I heard. And I know this. Whatever was happening between his mother and me, it wasn't just tension. It wasn't just family issues. It wasn't something I could fix with boundaries or therapy or patience. Something else was happening. Something deeper. Something older. Something that wanted me gone. And it was only getting started. I didn't sleep the night after the dinner. I couldn't. Not after the mirror. Not after the hallway. Not after hearing Mark whisper a sentence that didn't belong to him.
Something had slipped into the spaces of my life, something that wore familiarity like a disguise. By morning, the house felt wrong, not haunted, not possessed, arranged, like someone had moved the air itself an inch to the left. I went through my routine like I was walking underwater, shower, coffee, breakfast, each movement a quiet attempt to pretend nothing had changed. But my reflection kept haunting me, not because anything looked different, but because it looked watched. Every time I blinked, I felt a presence lag a half-second behind my movements, like something was studying the rhythm of my body from just beyond sight. When Mark came downstairs, he didn't greet me with a kiss like he used to. Instead, he walked past with a stiffness that wasn't tiredness. It was distance, intentional, placed. Did you sleep? I asked softly. Fine, he said without turning around. Only 1 word, but it scraped wrong inside me, flat, empty, automated, like someone had pressed a button behind his ribs and made him speak. I waited until he left for work before I let myself breathe, and even then, the air in the house felt thick, as if the walls themselves were listening. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Are you behaving? No context, no name, no reason. Just that question. My blood ran cold. Before I could reply, another message appeared. Don't make this harder. I blocked the number immediately, but the damage was done. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Whoever, or whatever, was doing this was getting bolder, more confident. I knew I had to leave the house. I grabbed my keys, shoved my shoes on, and practically threw myself into the car. I drove with no destination, just away, away from the house, from the texts, from the suffocating presence that felt too close. But as I turned onto the main road, I saw her, Eleanor, standing on the sidewalk, facing traffic, perfectly still. Her posture was identical to the hallway apparition, rigid, unnatural, spine too straight to be comfortable. She wasn't waiting for a bus. She wasn't walking. She was waiting. For me. As I passed, her head turned slowly, too slowly,
tracking my car with an unnatural precision, neck movements smooth like a mechanical pivot. I didn't look back. I couldn't. But something in the mirror flashed, white, sharp, like the same light from the hallway. When I blinked, it was gone. I drove to a coffee shop across town, one I'd only been to once. Neutral ground, safe, or safer than home. I sat in the corner, hands wrapped around a cup I wasn't drinking, watching the door every time it opened. I needed to think. It felt like the first time in days that my mind wasn't being pulled like a puppet string. I took out a notebook from my bag, trying to piece everything together. The hallway apparition, the aligned kitchen cabinets, the hairpin in my dresser, the etched words on the mirror, the texts, and Mark, changing. Every line I wrote felt heavier than the last. This wasn't just manipulation. It wasn't psychological games or boundary violations. Something was breaking through the cracks of my life. Something that wore Eleanor as a vessel, or a mask. My pen was shaking when a shadow moved across my table. I looked up and nearly screamed. Mark stood there, but his expression, it wasn't him. His eyes looked dimmer, like someone had dialed down the humanity in them. His face held a calmness that wasn't calm. It was blank, empty, rehearsed. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His tone wasn't angry. It was neutral in a way that made my skin crawl. "I needed to get out of the house," I whispered. He stared at me for too long, as if trying to process the sentence like it was written in a language he hadn't fully learned. "You shouldn't leave without telling me." That wasn't how he talked. That wasn't how any normal person talks to their spouse. "Mark, what's happening to you?" I whispered. He didn't blink, didn't breathe deeply, just stared. Then, in the same toneless voice, "You need to come home. She's waiting." My stomach dropped. "Who?" I asked, even though I knew. His jaw twitched, just once. "My mother," he said. "She wants to talk to you." No. "Mark," I whispered, "you're scaring me." For the first time, something flickered in his expression, like a glitch. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His body swayed slightly, and his hand twitched at his side as if fighting something internal. He started, then froze. His posture snapped back to stillness. "We should go," voice monotone again. That was when I realized whatever was happening to him wasn't voluntary. He was stuck inside something he couldn't fight. I grabbed my bag and walked out of the shop. Mark followed silently, 3 steps behind me. Not beside me. Behind me. Like an escort. Or a guard. When we reached the parking lot, I didn't go to my car. I kept walking, turning corners, moving faster, testing if he'd speed up. He did, matching me step for step. My breath shortened. I turned sharply behind a building and pressed my back against the wall, shaking. Footsteps approached, rhythmic, steady, unhurried. He appeared around the corner and stopped just inches from me. Then softly, almost humanly, he whispered, "Don't make her angry." I don't know what terrified me more, the threat or the fear in his voice that didn't belong to the man standing in front of me. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions and the walls are thin enough to hear your own heartbeat reflect back at you. I locked the door, pushed a chair under the handle, and turned every light on. Finally, I allowed myself to fall apart. My breathing broke. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. I couldn't stop imagining her face, her stillness, her voice outside the bathroom door. Who writes messages on mirrors? Who stands outside your bedroom at 2 a.m.? Who appears in places they physically couldn't be? Someone who isn't constrained by being human. Someone who wants control. someone who wants me removed. Hours passed. I stayed awake, sitting against the headboard, legs pulled to my chest, clutching my phone like a lifeline. At 2:11 a.m., the same minute as before, I heard it. A knock. Soft. Deliberate. On the motel door. My lungs stopped working. Another knock. Then her voice. Calm. Sweet. Perfectly modulated. "Let's talk, dear." My vision blurred as terror flooded every nerve in my body. She found me. She shouldn't have been able to, but she did. I covered my mouth and stayed completely still, not breathing, not blinking. Then came the worst sound, the sound that hollowed out everything inside me. The door handle twisting. Slowly, quietly, trying to open against the chair braced beneath it. I stared at the handle, watching it turn a fraction of an inch, then another, metal creaking under pressure. Then her whisper seeped through the crack. "You can't hide from family." The chair shifted slightly. I choked on a sob. The handle turned again. Then, silence. Not gradual. Not fading. Just gone. No footsteps. No retreating sound. Nothing. When I finally dared to look through the peephole, the hallway was empty. But something lay on the floor outside the door. A hairpin. Silver. Old-fashioned. Placed perfectly straight. Waiting. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When the sun finally rose, I packed my bag with shaking hands, grabbed my keys, and slipped out of the motel like a fugitive. I didn't know where I was going, just away, somewhere she couldn't follow. Or maybe there was no such place. I drove until the sky turned orange, until the town disappeared behind me, until the road stretched into nothing. Eventually I pulled into a rest stop and sat in the car, forehead against the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My body felt empty, like fear had carved out everything inside me and left only the echo. After a long silence, my phone buzzed. A voicemail. From Mark. I almost didn't listen, but something in me needed to know if he was himself, or if he was gone. I pressed play. Static. Heavy breathing. Then a small broken whisper. "She won't let me say much, but you were right. Leave. Don't come home. Don't." A sharp sound. A gasp. Then nothing. The message ended abruptly. I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat, heart pounding so hard it hurt. There was no going back now. Not to the house, not to him, not to the life I'd had 3 weeks ago. Whatever lived inside Eleanor wasn't just toxic. It was ancient. It was intelligent. And it wanted control. Of Mark, of me, of anything that threatened its hold. I started the car. Hands trembling, breath uneven. I don't know where I'm going, but I know one thing. I'm not running from her anymore. I'm running because something inside me is changing, because that presence, that cold, creeping, whispering presence, didn't stay in the house. It followed me. And now, sometimes, when I look into mirrors, I see a second reflection, standing just behind mine, smiling a smile that isn't mine to make. And I hear her voice in my ear. "You're almost ready."